One of my ancestors was an itinerant Methodist preacher in Kentucky. My father was a missionary with an evangelical organization, and I have been a Christian from my early childhood. But it is the Council of Nicaea that made me Orthodox. And this is true for thousands of others. In reflecting on the impact of Nicaea, therefore, I think it is important to share how this happened, not just to me, but to a whole movement of people that became known as the Evangelical Orthodox and many others who have followed. From this lived perspective, then, I would offer 3 observations and 1 hope for the future. To begin with, if you will see and picture in your mind the church as a tree, the Christianity that I grew up in, I see now as a leaf on a distant twig on a branch far, far removed from the great trunk of the church. This is still true of many American Christians even today. We had the Bible, we believed in God, we were giving our life to Christ, and we were trying to live by the Holy Spirit. But our knowledge of church history was nearly nothing. We assumed that everything beyond the New Testament was simply irrelevant at best, or at worst, on the wrong track, and either way, as far as we were concerned, it had little bearing on us. We were zealous for God, but only as a loosely organized group of Christians. Eventually, we realized, though, that something was missing, and we came to suspect that that something was an expression of the church. So it happened in the 1970s that our group banded together with other groups across America and decided to open the door to church history. We looked beyond the time of the New Testament, and what we discovered surprised us. We discovered those who are called the Apostolic Fathers. I read letters that sounded like pages from the New Testament, the letters of Ignatius, of St. Clement of Rome. So we kept looking, and we discovered something quite important. And that is that when Christian leaders had a question about what to do or what to believe, they got together in a council and believed that the Holy Spirit would lead them to the truth. So, in our, I could say, naivety, we pledged together that we would now do the same. We stayed together, we studied together, and we believed that God would lead us to His truth if we were willing to change. So we soon came to the 4th century, the end of the era of Roman persecutions. And there we ran into the Council of Nicaea. Though I had been a Christian all my life, I had never heard the name Athanasius until that moment. This was somewhat shocking and also, frankly, somewhat embarrassing to me at that time. And yet it was also exciting. Who were these heroes gathered in Nicaea, whose wounds and scars the Emperor Constantine kissed as he passed through their assembly to welcome them? We had come upon an amazing era, and we realized we had much to learn. So we studied hard. But it is important to understand that in the Christology of Nicaea, we recognize the same Jesus we had always known and loved. So together we quickly became convinced God wanted us to find this church of Nicaea and be part of it. This is what we were missing. So we kept on looking. In our simplistic approach, we found that the creed drawn up by the council was slightly altered by the church in the West with the addition of the filioque. We were, of course, familiar with the Roman Catholic Church, and when we connected the dots and saw that the Catholic Church was that same very church of the West, we decided simply to close that door and to look more toward the East. What happened to the churches of Athanasius, Cyril, Basil, and John Chrysostom? We kept studying together, and we began to change, to imitate and pattern ourselves after the church we were discovering. And this is how the Council of Nicaea led us and introduced us to the Orthodox Church. During this time, while I was living in Berkeley, California, my friends invited me to join them in attending a lecture by Father Alexander Schmemann at the Graduate Theological Union there. So we went, and as we left, we said among ourselves, "Did not our hearts burn within us when he spoke?" And then we read the book, The Orthodox Church by Timothy Ware, later known as Metropolitan Kallistos. We said, this is it. This is the church we need to join. So a friend and I decided we would go to this church. We looked in the yellow pages and found the Orthodox Cathedral in San Francisco, and we went to Saturday Vespers. But honestly, what we walked into bewildered us. It was as if we looked down at the book that we had been reading and then up at what was before us, and we could not make the connection. Was this the Orthodox Church of Nicaea? Surely it was. We just had trouble seeing it through all the gold and the glitter and the smoke that were unusual to us. But eventually we did see, and so as we continued to stay together and believe that God would lead us, we began to knock on the various doors of Orthodoxy, looking for a way into the church. A few years later, it was the door of the Antiochian Patriarchate that swung open. It was with both courage and compassion that Metropolitan Philip opened his home to this naive and strange group of seekers. And in 1987, he traveled to our individual churches, and he announced to each one, "Welcome home. Welcome home to the Church of Saints Peter and Paul." Tears streamed down our cheeks. And this is how the Holy Spirit and the Council of Nicaea led us fully into the Orthodox Church. As I look back now, nearly 40 years later, I do so with humility, with gratitude, with much more experience, and also with many new friends who have taught and inspired me. Now, 3 short observations. First, in our Orthodox baptism service, as catechumens are led from the narthex into the assembly, the priest announces, "Blessed is God who desires that all men should be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth." And as I look back over these 40 years, I have seen this now to be true. Over the years, I have seen dozens and dozens of people make a similar journey from being seekers to finding a home in the Orthodox Church. And so I conclude from my experience that this really is true. Those who seek God, He will lead. A second observation. There are many, many thousands of Christians, serious, saintly, loving people, devoting their life to Christ, who are completely unaware of the historic church, including the Council of Nicaea. Sometimes simply out of ignorance, but also sometimes their particular tradition or upbringing have so prejudiced them against the historic church that they consider it irrelevant. And yet, their own faith rests on and is enriched by the fruit of the historic church, even though they do not recognize it. This includes, for example, the canon of the New Testament, which they received and which they embrace, as well as the doctrines of Nicaea and other vital things. That Jesus Christ is truly God, of one essence with the Father and the Holy Spirit, these Christians who do not know the historic church that I am mentioning would also die no less than the martyrs of those ages long ago. And a third observation. If someone desires the will of God and will seek it, especially in the context of community or conciliarity or fellowship with others, and if they are willing to change, then I see that God will lead them to where they need to be. And where exactly that might be in this life, it is not our place to judge, but simply to welcome them as fellow pilgrims, as our equals, or even perhaps our betters. And now, finally, my hope for the future. The Orthodox Church today, just as it has needed at all times throughout its history, needs to be renewed and revitalized. If we can return to the image of the church as a tree, which I used at the beginning, and if you will bear with me in being a bit poetic, I believe that the renewal, indeed every renewal, will originate not so much in the hardwood of its history, nor in the strong branches of its traditions, nor in the splendid foliage of its many cultural expressions, but rather it will come ultimately from the life-giving energy, that sap stored deep in its roots, the living word of Jesus Christ contained in the Gospels, surging upward unto every member from generation to generation, awakening the hearts of anyone who will receive it, embrace it, confess it, and bow down before God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is my hope for the future, that this surge of life will happen again in this day, in our time, soon. Thank you.